Hello, everybody. We have over 160 guests from 30 countries joining us for today's in-session talk. Before introducing you to our guests, allow me to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will be able to share a link to the recording after today's event. We aim to have an interactive session today, and we invite you to ask questions by using the Q&A button. You can upvote any questions you find interesting to hear answered by our panel. Please use the chat button if you're having any technical difficulties, and one of our team will come and help you. Please join me in welcoming Despina, Emma, and Giorgos. I'm going to hand you over to Despina now, who's going to start today's conversation.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this in-session event, Ana-Meta-Materialisms, Contemporary Art Practice, Reinventing, Rethinking, and Referencing Itself, which is being brought to you today by the online Contemporary Art Summer School here at the Royal College of Art. My name is Despina Zacharopoulou. I'm a performance artist and a Doctor of Philosophy and Fine Art, leading the RCA's Contemporary Art Summer School for the past 8 years. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by two RCA painting alumni and fellow artists, Dr. Giorgos Kontis and Mrs. Emma Fineman. Welcome, both of you. Thank you for joining us. Today's discussion has been programmed in conjunction with this year's Contemporary Art Summer School, a 3-week practice-led introduction to the study and practice of contemporary art, structured around the development of each participant's own self-motivated individual project, delivered live online. There are still a few places left, so if you are interested in applying, please visit the short courses section on the RCA's website. So, for today's in-session, we were incredibly excited to invite Emma and Giorgos, who will be also teaching at this year's Contemporary Art Summer School, to reflect upon the ways in which their artistic practice might respond to this year's course theme, Ana-Meta-Materialisms, Contemporary Art Practice, Reinventing, Rethinking, and Referencing Itself, that might give birth to new artistic paradigms. Living in an era dictated by the virality and mutation of information spread throughout social media, artificial intelligence, and the internet, it has become more urgent than ever to rethink the role of feedback loops in the production of images and modes of thought in contemporary artistic practice. What is a feedback loop? A feedback loop is a closed system indicating the repetition of a single movement that turns back on itself to repeat again and again. However, this obsessive turning upon itself doesn't happen without a trace or a glitch, always leaving a certain kind of remainder or residue every time it repeats itself, thus returning always reinvented and always different. We are interested in investigating the fundamental question: what might be the role of feedback loops in contemporary artistic practice? How can an artist raise questions relating to contemporary art, materialisms, ideas, practices, and histories via processes of repeating, redoing, rethinking, and self-referencing? For the exploration of these questions, we have many thinkers and artists that we were inspired by, such as Deleuze, Johnny Golding, Hirst, Warburg, Satie, Neil, Mandelbrot, among others. Just to mention that, as Katie already said, We will ensure that we will have plenty of time for a Q&A discussion and questions, so please do use the Q&A function on Zoom to post your questions for Giorgos and Emma. And we will make sure that we will try to answer as many as possible at the end of today's talk. So, before I hand over, I just want to introduce very briefly Emma and Giorgos. Emma Fineman is a multidisciplinary artist who lives and works in London. She graduated with distinction as an MA in painting from the Royal College of Art in London and graduated magna cum laude with a BFA in painting from Maryland Institute College of Art. Emma's work is born from a space of questioning, of curiosity, of queerness. She is interested in the ways we are shaped by stories. With acute attention to materiality and gesture, her work interrogates what it is to live in a queer body in today's world, one that exists in the slippages between the normative delineations of gender and sexuality. Solo exhibitions include Encounters, Huxley Parlour, London, Realms of the Unreal, Public Gallery, London. Group exhibitions include John Moore's Painting Prize Exhibition, Walker Art Gallery, Liverpool, Bloomberg New Contemporaries, South London Gallery, London, Surge, East Wing Biennial 13, Courtauld Institute, London, Liminal Spaces, Gallery Isa, Mumbai, India, Bird Song, Timothy Taylor, London, UK, Dreaming of Eden, Timothy Taylor, New York City, and Across the Pond, Contemporary Painting in London, Eric Firestone Gallery, New York City. Fineman's works have been selected for several prestigious awards, including the Presidential Fellowship Grant, the Harley Open Judges Prize, the London Bros Editions Prize, and the New American Paintings Pacific Coast Competition. Dr. Giorgos Kontis is a visual artist and lecturer. His work focuses on abstraction, the function of the painted image, and the relationship it may build with the beholder. Giorgos studied at the Athens School of Fine Arts, the Academy of Visual Arts in Munich, and the University of Arts in Berlin. He holds an MFA from the St. Just Academy in Breda, the Netherlands, and a PhD in painting from the Royal College of Art in London, on the notions of authenticity and of the image. He occasionally curates shows mostly related to painting matters and is an advisor for the WSA Painting Prize. He lives and works in Athens and Hamburg. Recent shows include Still Sand Reminiscence, Farbbereitschaft, Haubrock Foundation, Berlin, Encore, New Greek Painting, Municipal Gallery of Athens, Ground Diaries, Atelier House Aachen, Matter Echoed, Bark Gallery Berlin Lab, Ground Suspended, Kramer Show Space Berlin, Rebetiko, City of Athens Art Center, Mother Tongue, Crooks Gallery, Athens. Talks include Cultural Identity, Europe and Authenticity, Royal College of Art, London, with Gillan Tawadros, I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, and Luke Tymans, Rijks Academy Open Studios, Amsterdam, with Camille van Winkel, Authenticity in the Act of Painting Symposium, De Pont Museum, Tilburg, the Netherlands. So, without further ado, I'll hand over to Emma and Giorgos to hear their responses on how their artistic practice responds to this year's Contemporary Art Summer School theme, Ana-Meta-Materialisms, Contemporary Art Practice, Reinventing, Rethinking, and Referencing Itself. So over to you, Emma and Giorgos.
Shall I start then? Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much, Despina and Katie, for the introduction. it's a pleasure to be here, to be participating in this very interesting talk, and to be participating in the summer school as well. Challenging and exciting. And it's a pleasure to be on the same panel doing this conversation with Emma. Very interesting topic on matters of repetition, that also relate to technology, to the feedback loop, as you mentioned. In the conversation we had a few days ago when we were organizing this conversation, you asked us to one of the questions was how do we relate to repetition through our work. We might have an academic background, but we are artists as well. I'm focusing on painting as well, such as Emma. Repetition has been a key part in my thoughts and work. I guess it's because of repetition, redoing, rethinking. I guess it's because of the use of painting that it's an old medium. So it's like it is as if I am feeling as if I feel that there is a family tree there, so to say, with grandfathers or grandmothers and ancestors in the painting world, and you kind of relate to that, and there is a sense of an echoing of that, and a sense of repetition that becomes more than an influence. So I believe that for us individuals, we are more than influenced. We're basically formed by our cultural context, by our surroundings, by our time and space. And but as makers as well, we are more than influenced by the traditions of our mediums. I'm referring to media theory, to technological determinism, perhaps. So it's in whichever field you are continuing a legacy, so to say, which becomes a heritage, but can become a burden as well, in the sense of it gives you tools, but up to which percentage does it confine you? There is no tabula rasa in this regard. There's no blank slate. Everything exists in a sense of repetition, and in this regard, I feel that the borders, the threshold between the influence and myself as a maker become blurred. And where do I stop and where do I begin as an individual? Where does this influence stop and the forming of my artistic identity starts? So I'm very much interested in ideas of a decentralized agency, in finding traces of authenticity in this repetition. My PhD, as you mentioned, was on the notion of authenticity and of the image. And as a result, I very much like standing between two famous quotes from the pre-Socratics, ancient Greek philosophers like Parmenides and Heraclitus, where for Parmenides there is this constant loop. There's a perpetual time, a perpetual present time, that there's no past or future, but instead there is this repetition, the perpetuality, and it's very interesting for me. But at the same time, I am very much interested in what, in the famous fragment of Heraclitus, who says that you cannot enter the same river twice because the water has changed and the river is not the same. And apart from the water, it is also the you who has changed, the person who has entered the river, because you have gained this experience. And then you are not the same person again. So there's this repetition, but with a glitch, as you very nice mentioned at the beginning. And this glitch might be us somehow, might be the individuation, the individual, the formation of our agency as makers. And this comes to my work through an attitude of questioning things. I cannot be at ease easily. I need to question things. I kind of I kind of detest the sense of a comfort zone. I need to, especially with painting. Painting for me is such a challenging medium. Can be fun, but it's mostly quite hard to, to work with. So there's this sense of feedback and a sense of critical rigor, critical engagement with things that happens in the studio, but also happens with colleagues, with friends, with peers. And it was also happening, I'm sure Emma had similar experiences during her master's at the RCA. It was happening a lot at the RCA, having colleagues or tutors, supervisors challenging us in constructive ways. And I think it's also in the character of the summer school as well to critically engage with things and to question things, but not to exhaust them at the same time. There's this sense of critical reflection. And what else is important for me is sometimes to, of course, I have a keen interest in theory and philosophy, but as a painter, I sometimes like leaving theory perhaps a bit outside the door of the studio. And what is important for me is in the studio to have an heuristic attitude, to experiment with materials, with what material is a big question, of course, but physical material, so to say, in this instance, to have trial and error, to not be afraid to fail. And as the famous quote has it, attributed to Samuel Beckett, fail again, fail better, challenge yourself, engage with what you do. And and in a sense related to a sense of a loop and to repetition. That's from my side for now. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Giorgos. Very interesting insights. So let's go to Emma, and then we will have some time to discuss and also answer some questions from the audience. Emma?
Hello. Firstly, I just want to say thank you, Despina, for inviting me today. As you mentioned, I had the great pleasure of getting my education from the Royal College of Art and receiving my master's degree there. And I think I completely agree with what Giorgos is saying. It's a wonderful opportunity to interrogate your practice in a forum that allows you to understand not just how we make things, but our reasonings for why, and the repetition of questioning that you have to go through, which stays with you in your practice as you continue on past your degree and past the time that you're in the institution. There's a sort of feedback loop that you have, these sort of like phrases and terms that you've heard. There's this voice that happens as it occurs as you're making, which I think is really important. And I feel really grateful for the experience of having that and having that language and having those tools. So I'm also quite grateful for being able to participate in this lecture today. I guess the points of Ana-Materialism I set forth by Johnny Golding that I found really interesting is this idea of the pineal eye as a point of perception. And something that I think about a lot in terms of painting and my positioning within it, and in art making in general, is this opportunity to consider perception as something that is not linear, as something that occurs from many different points, all simultaneously. And I feel that it is incredibly important, and I feel that it is my role to revisit the sort of linear timeline that has been laid out to us as a circle. And to go back to some of these stories as they had been told and reposition them so that potentially we're invited to engage in alternative potentialities, that at one given moment, many different things could have occurred. And why is it that we see it in one way or have been told that it existed in one way? So in my own practice, this means revisiting stories from antiquity, from religion, from mythology, and also seeing how certain signs and symbols have been repeated across faiths and timelines, and why that is. I find it fascinating that the story of Mother Mary is quite similar to the story of Maya Devi, that the birth of Jesus is quite similar in ways to the story of Buddha. Why do those things occur in such ways? I have this amazing book. It's called The Book of Symbols. And so when I'm working, as I'm making my paintings, and also in the monoprints that I make, I see them as this daily ritual, creating a lexicon of signs, of symbols, of things that come from an intuitive way of drawing and making, that those images might have come through my own sieve of lived experience. And as they emerge, as I'm drawing them from an intuitive place, I question, why have you presented yourself here? And what are your connections to, as Giorgos was saying, this art historical positioning? When you look at the Book of Symbols, when you see, okay, this bird figure has been reoccurring, that's a wonderful resource to be able to see in all of these different languages and iterations, what are the different meanings for this this object, this being, this idea. And the other thing that I find to be really exciting about the potentiality of painting and art making, in terms of this idea of perception, is that, especially in how I think about painting, there's room for gaps, there's room for slippages, there's room for places where things don't line up. And so you're setting someone's understanding of what's happening just slightly off balance. And that unbalancing is so important, because I think that we have this need right now, in a time where we're receiving such an inundation of information, to have some semblance of concrete idea of what we believe in as truth. Unfortunately, as we know, as we engage in contemporary media, it's becoming harder and harder to have that concrete sense of reality with the presence of AI, with the presence of all of these falsely generated footage, but also even clips where you're seeing one section of something happening. What happened just before it? What happened just after it? Does that completely change the narrative of something? Unfortunately, I think as a response to that, many people have become quite hardened by necessity in what their viewpoint is. And so our ability to listen and to be open to the quote unquote potential opposition has become fraught. And so I think that where that sort of off balancing is important, these revisitings are important, those slippages are important, is that it reminds us that there is a fallibility in our perception. And in that, there is openness. In that, there's a possibility, there's a new potentiality. What if I missed something? What if something else could have occurred? What if we revisit this? What if we repeat this in that way? And so for me, that's incredibly important. And that's one of the most exciting parts about why I work in the mediums that I work in. In sculpture, there's this bodily response to the physicality of that medium that forces you to see something in the round, to move around it and have this point of discovery, how that can be activated. And in painting, there's this, as Giorgos was also pointing out, this incredible history, this wonderful and sometimes overbearing relationship that we have to every image, every painting that has been made since the caves of Lascaux and probably before that. But it also allows us to quote those, which I love, and to re-bring back certain compositions, certain figurative information, even titlings from previous attempts. And I think that in that way, I mean, it's similar to in music, in rap, where like you quote somebody to bring them back into a new timeline. I think it's really a wonderful way of engaging with art making as almost like some form of a time portal. It is this sort of amazing loop in that way. Um, there's a work that I made, which I feel like is also quite related to the idea of the Mandelbrot, which you mentioned earlier, Despina, which for me is called it's called crock recursions. And so where mathematics and this sort of looping occurs in a crock recursion, it's a mathematical equation in which, if not changed, it will continue in an infinite loop. This is something that in that painting I was thinking about in terms of the weight of the decision of repeating ourselves through ourselves. The painting is a triple portrait. It's of myself, my father, and his late brother Judah. And in this time that I exist as a woman at the age that I am, these questions of, am I going to procreate? Am I going to continue that lineage? Is there a choice in that? Do I have agency over that decision making? That became very much a part of that painting, this way of revisiting the subject of looping as it occurs naturally, as it occurs historically, and as it occurs in my own decision making and in mathematics. The Drotzy effect, as it were, this sort of looping of an image as you see it repeated back and back and back and back. And you see that in someone's face. In the simplicity of a portrait, it's all there. It could be, I was looking at my best friend's son yesterday, and the way he was smirking on the camera was her mouth. And it was the most amazing thing as a best friend of someone who's loved that smile for so many years to see that. And the simple act of making a portrait ties to that, which I just think is some form of magic, honestly. So I think, oh, and then lastly, I guess in my interest in monoprint, that also has this way of utilizing a plate where, especially in I have this work called the Phantom series, where I was reworking the same surface, even though normally in a monoprint it's just one of one because you're drawing on the substrate. But every time in reworking over that same substrate, there's traces of the previous plate that then transfer themselves onto the future image. And these ghostings are really important. It's that way that memory gets sort of marred by experience and imprints itself on future moments. I also love what Giorgos was saying about present time, that it's a constantly existing, always ever present, and yet it is so deeply affected and impacted by these traces. And so that's where I feel like that as a medium really allows me to explore that as an idea in a way that's like a constant state of discovery, where you're like, ugh, these blots that were uncontrolled are exactly what I feel are the most compelling part of the thing that I've made. This is my thoughts on the subject.
Great. Thank you so much, Emma. Just some responses to what you both said before we open the discussion to the audience. Something that I found really important that you both said is about this idea of failing through repetition, allowing these gaps and openings that you said, Emma, these mistakes to exist in the work. So I have the sense that maybe one of the important things that are connected with the idea of repetition as a feedback loop, and I'm saying as a feedback loop because it's not that we are talking about a repetition of the same that repeats itself as the exact copy, but every time something repeats itself, something else is brought along with it, something like a remainder or a trace. So in this process, this idea of failure, of making mistakes, is actually what makes the work. So even though one might think that repetition is just making the same thing again and again, it is never the same thing. So something that one could ask, for example, is what is being repeated? I don't know if you would like to answer this question, if you have any thoughts on this question. What is it that is being repeated in the artistic practice through repetition?
I guess it might be the world, how things are and how things, we are taught how to do things. Now I'm speaking in a Foucaultian or Heideggerian way. We are taught how to think, how to act, how to do things. It's a matter of repetition somehow. But what is also important is this slippage, as Emma mentioned, or what the error that you mentioned, or the sense of the glitch there, which might be a moment of, can it be a moment of consciousness? Can it be a moment of critical awareness, of thinking that, no, that's not exactly what I want to do, but I would like to change it. And then maybe this occurs in this repetition and breaks this loop. It's a matter of method. It's not like this rectilinear thing, this rectilinear way of doing things, perhaps in a Cartesian sense, that but it moves more sideways, and it bypasses things, it questions things, like Emma tried to say before with narratives, or like the essay, like the Johnny's essay on Ana-Materialism, was also trying to question these things, these notions we take for granted, essence. There's no essence, perhaps. It's perhaps a matter of context, a matter of how you see things, from which side you see things. And
not even, apologies to interrupt you, I would say not even context, not even the side that you are looking at things. I would say, because as you already mentioned, both you and Emma, one of the readings that inspired this theme was Johnny Golding's Ana-Materialism. It's about questioning metaphysics. It's about questioning, as you said, Giorgos, essentialism. It's about questioning representation. So maybe it's not even a matter of context, but it's maybe a matter of an apparatus in the Foucauldian sense again. So yeah, please.
It's interesting, also connected to the perception, and it's a pressing matter, especially now in the post-truth times, and even more with the rise of the overtaking, not just rise of artificial intelligence, which is such an interesting topic as well. But a matter of perception, and then I do this link yet again with painting and with images and the way they work with us, and the way some information might change the way we look at something. It's little exercises I do with my students as well, that I show them images and then I give different information, and it's interesting how the very same image becomes different somehow. If you change the title, if you change the time of its production, if you change the narrative behind its time, but But the question that remains there for me is this way of perceiving things, which is not just with our brain and the retinal, but it's a more holistic way of looking, of perceiving things. I was thinking recently of Joseph Beuys's phrase of I think with the knee either way, and anyway something he mentioned it one of the things I try to do with my work, one of the things I love in painting in any case is a sense of unhinging the gaze because also, as I said at the beginning of this comment, we learn how to do things. We're taught, not by any supernatural forces, but by the way things are, how to do things, how to look at things, how to see things, how to see painting. And can we have paintings that can do that can unhinge, question the way we look at them? That's one of the things I love about painting. And a small last part of this comment. Sorry if I'm talking too much. In terms of perception, it's something I started recently thinking about. But when we are looking at something, we put all these different parameters in this gaze, in the way we look at things. It's of course the intellectual side of questioning things, but it's also this gut feeling. It's also our world that we bring into this seeing. It's our phenomenological approach, our experiences and our memories. And I kind of started calling that a kaleidoscopic gaze. It's like you look at something through these different apparatus of mirrors that bring all these different gazes in one, or break this one gaze into the complexity and multiplicity it has. And yeah, in terms of perception, I wanted to mention that.
Great. Thank you, Giorgos. Emma, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think that this question of what is getting repeated, I think, and also what Yorgos was saying in terms of what it does, that there's an effect that is created. I think about this a lot in terms of iconography, how the constant repetition of seeing an image of something affects the level of the degree of importance that we have with that thing, and also the superhuman nature of it. And we see it today in imagery, the constant repetition of imagery of celebrity. When you've seen someone's face so many times in so many different contexts, even creating various versions of them, action figures or sculptures, or that has this, they become larger than a human, than the individual themselves. And I think that that's by design. It is intended to do that. And it's interesting how that affects consciousness and how that affects our understanding and our perception of the world. When you've heard a story told so many times, you sometimes cease to question it and you think of it as, well, this is what must have happened. This is what I've been told has happened in this way. And it's, I think, a requirement, and I would say a call to action in a way, in contemporary time, that we create the glitch in that. Our human experience needs to insert itself in that feedback loop so that maybe new images might occur, informed by our own lived experience, informed by these questions, informed by our curiosities. And that's where, for me personally, I feel like querying things and queerness becomes really important, that there's like an openness about, could this look differently? What if a whole new series of images replaces those or adds in addition to the others? What could be the effect of that?
Great. Thank you, Emma. Very interesting. Just a small comment that I agree with you with the iconography and this idea of the repetition and how it somehow adds to the sacred character of an image. And maybe the first one who managed to address this issue in contemporary art was Andy Warhol.
Mm.
So let's go to the Q&A and see some questions that we have from the audience. So we have a question from Destiny Hankerson. Do you think with contemporary art in today's time, learning how to create new forms of art through multimedia can be meaningful in rethinking our ideas of art? Who would like to answer?
So this is something I've been thinking about a lot, and it's not necessarily that it's an entirely new innovation. In fact, I think it's actually the embracing of a multiplicity of making that I really feel like in this time, we're finally, and it seems insane that this is like just happening now, but this thing of bending genres and mediums within one's practice, I feel like there has been such a strong sense of you are a painter or you sing and you make music in this genre, and that we're now at a time of openness to the idea that these things can engage with each other, can blend with each other, can be in combination as opposed to in these sort of separated silos. And that's true for not just expressions artistically, but also in how we present ourselves in our personhood. We've had this like incredibly archaic, in my view, idea of presentation of oneself, certainly in terms of how gender is expressed, and that there is becoming this openness which has existed for a very long time, where these things kind of mesh. And that feels like a new beginning. That feels like, even though it's already tools that we have had, I think that openness of things kind of existing in the in-between and meshing feels like the new, some form of new might not be the right word, but it feels like an important stage in our consciousness and our development of our consciousness as a society and as practitioners.
And apart from the genres and the multidisciplinary ways that artists work today, it's also the form of the artwork itself that has been like expanded in different forms. Like if we would think of a painting, let's say of a work of art in formalist terms, just standing hanging on a wall or having this concrete form. In the 90s and in after 2000, it started becoming more like an event, like more participatory, more like, and not only like if in the writings of Nicolas Bourriaud, for instance, like something which becomes communicated in different terms. And I think even more now today with more digital works that for me bring the question, bring a different questioning of materiality, because it's a topic which is very much discussed these last years. Perhaps a conceptual sense of materiality, a different relation, a different sense of materiality, which might be digital, and of course, in a sense, it changes and affects the way art and contemporary art is being processed and worked and experienced also.
Great. Thank you both. I'll move on to a comment and then another question. So Zrinka Tomasic, if I pronounce it correctly, or Tomasic, this made me think of Chinese traditional painting, where the owner of the painting could add something of their own on the painting. As a loop perception has brought a circular perspective in the contemporary art, I think that AI is going to bring the similar. The artists today could add something of their own. This is a comment, a very interesting one. And then we have another question from Leslie Darcy. I'm interested in the panel's thoughts on repetition in large-scale installation works and sculptures. Any thoughts?
I have some thoughts on both, because the first one is we tend to look at things through the contexts and through the way these have been defined in the Western context. So it may be in Chinese traditional painting, these characters, these agencies are different. So you might be adding something to a painting if you are the owner of it, and it might be legitimate as it, which wouldn't be in a Western context. So perhaps it exists in other narratives, so to say. And can AI do this? I think AI brings a sense of post-production. It makes it even more present for me. And I see this happening. I can see this happening in the context of AI, but from the side of the artist, that you have more material to work with and you have more material to manage in a DJing form, perhaps. Yeah, just two quick thoughts on that.
Emma, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so in terms of, sorry, the question about installation and repetition and sculpture, I think about this a lot in terms of the history of painting as it relates to, and sculpture as it relates to architectural spaces. I think, again, that gets back to what I was saying about the way that imagery changes or the presence of an image changes in iconography. I think the same is true in terms of engaging with these narrative images in the context of an environment that is consuming. What does it mean to enter into a space where, we have such a long history of those spaces being seen as some form of sanctuary or a place of ritual, that there is this sort of pouring over or tradition that begins to occur in those environments. So I think that there's so much potential in revisiting that as a format. That is exactly what I'm doing in the Genesis project work. It's creating a painting, and in ways, I guess it's a response to Poussin's Seasons works. That the painting is made of 12 panels. Each one is a month, each 3 is a season, and it constitutes a year. And so when you enter into that environment where you're surrounded in a circular sense to a painting, the way that you read it can actually loop in different directions, which is important to me, that it's not necessarily viewed in the edge to edge format, maybe right to left way that we often engage with an image. When it's in the format of an installation, when you're surrounded by it in a circular sense, that it does something in terms of the way that we review the footage.
Great. Thank you both. I just wanted to answer myself very briefly and maybe a little bit in a cryptic way, because we don't have enough time to elaborate upon some issues that are very philosophical. And inevitably, if one is interested in this idea of repetition and difference, they need to visit or revisit philosophers, scientists, artists, that touched upon this idea of repetition and difference. We already mentioned a few times Johnny Golding, because not only she's a brilliant philosopher, but also she teaches at the RCA. She always participates in the final crits of the Contemporary Art Summer School. And her thought is really important. But also, as mentioned in the beginning of this talk, of this discussion, of course, one has to go to Gilles Deleuze, Difference and Repetition, or The Logic of Sense, also to Mandelbrot, as we said, Aby Warburg and the Atlas Mnemosyne piece, Nietzsche and the idea of the eternal return. So without, elaborating upon all these complex ideas right now, I will try just to briefly respond to 2-3 questions that I think they are asking more or less the same thing. So one question is, how do feedback loops function when working with subjects that face epistemological uncertainty or instability? This is from Maxine Apolito, if I pronounce correctly. Then another question by Mary Manghausing. To what extent can contemporary art foster a deeper emotional or intellectual connection between the artist and the viewer? And another relevant question, to my opinion, is, first of all, there's a question about Johnny Golding. We posted her text on the chat, so please, if you would like to read it, I think this will help you answer any, questions that you might have. And then there's another question by Nandita Sharma. To what extent can a repetition in art truly be identical? Doesn't each attempt at repeating introduce a new idea, a new method, or gesture, altering the work in the very act of recreating? So, and then also we have another comment and question by Zrinka Tomasic. The repetition depends upon the culture and education the artist has, but thinking of the ones of the first artists, we can wonder, is there a repetition? There was originality. Do you think that AI can bring the new kind of art, original art, alongside with the repetition and the new perception of art? And then the last, not last, we have many questions actually, and I'm sorry that we will not be able to answer all. So my brief response is this. What is being repeated? Is it the stroke? Is it the gesture? Is it the theme? What is it that is being repeated? If we go to Aby Warburg and his work Atlas Mnemosyne, we will see that repetition is beyond what is being represented in the paintings. According to Aby Warburg, what survived within the history of iconology from the work of ancient Greek to the work of Renaissance was the dancing menad, was the movement of the dancing menad. And this is about a continuous generative force that keeps circulating among certain works of art. Not all works of art do that. And then you might ask, as for example, Nandita asks, okay, why don't we have a repetition that inserts a difference all the time? Well, not exactly. Because if we go to Deleuze, if I remember correctly, he says that only the extreme, the excessive returns. What does this mean? Is it enough if I do 3 strokes? And then I said, okay, I did 3 repetitive movements. Bam, reinvention. Not really. I have the sense, as a performance artist myself, that specializes in long durational performance art, and with my biggest work being for 2 months, 8 hours per day, there are thresholds that you pass through repeating. And in order to allow something new to emerge, you have to get out of your comfort zone. And this doesn't happen with 3 gestures. It might require 200. So this is my brief response. We have 4 more minutes. I'm really sorry that we cannot respond to all the questions because there are so many, and I really thank you for your interest in the theme. Maybe we could answer one more question and then finish with this discussion.
I could have 2 quick, sorry.
Yeah, please. If you would like to close the session with some comments, Giorgos and Emma, please do so, because we have just a few minutes. Okay.
It's just 2 quick comments that came to my mind because of one question you mentioned about if contemporary art can create an emotional connection between the maker and the viewer. Absolutely. This is what's one of the things I am striving for in painting, and it's one of the reasons I like to use. I'm so much interested in abstract painting because of the way it can perhaps bypass the direct intellectual aspect of things, and I can perhaps bypass it as well, and create and allow things to be said, to be uttered sideways and implied in metaphors, and rather than and addressed to reminiscence, to the emotional side of things. And one comment on that, and then another quick comment on repetition. I remembered a short text by Borges, Pierre Menard, who Pierre Menard rewrote Don Quixote 300 years after Cervantes, and so it poses exactly this matter of repetition. That it is exactly it's supposed to be.
It's in his book Labyrinths. The one that you're referring to is from Borges' book Labyrinth.
And it's supposed to be the same text, but yet again, since it is made like 300 years after the original, since it entails, it incorporates the knowledge of the first text, it cannot be the same. So how can the same not be the same? Of course, when it goes to matters of art, all these things take a more metaphorical, a more schematic form. There is a repetition, yes, but not the same. Yeah, it's just 2 quick reactions to the questions you read.
Great. Thank you, Giorgos. Emma, a quick comment and then we wrap up.
I guess I wanted to respond to what you were just saying, Despina, about duration in its relationship to repetition and in its relationship to transformation. I think that there is something so valid about that like when you experience something, I think there's a very human quality in observing pattern and observing the way that things we create these kind of associations just by naturally. And I think that what you're saying about our need for sitting with something and through something over a period of time, past those thresholds, is such an important part of human experience, but also where innovation and cognition can happen. That you have to get through that those iterations and to allow yourself as a maker and as a practitioner to experience something over and over and over again, whether that be, as you were saying, what is getting repeated, whether that be in revisiting an image or in revisiting a gesture or in revisiting this simple rewriting of a phrase, this sort of like automatic necessity to do something and then keep doing it in consistency, I think is really important. And I also think that our shortened attention spans and the rapid nature by which things occur in the digital sphere makes us feel that time isn't an element, especially the pressures of social media to produce and produce and produce and produce. But it's so important. So I just wanted to highlight that as a necessary, that we actually have to force ourselves at times to hold on to duration. And especially when experience something again and again and again, because our mind will force itself to find something, discover something as we go along with it. You get bored, and that boredom is important. That's where a new discovery happens. So I really wanted to speak to that and highlight that because I think it is really a very valuable thing to look at.
Great. Thank you, Emma. I agree. So I think we are done for today. Thank you all for attending. Apologies for not being able to answer all the questions. Katie, Sophie, Peter, would you like to add anything or we just disappear?
Yeah, I can do the outro. Thank you to everyone who joined us for today's talk. Despina, Emma, and Giorgos. Thank you all so much for sharing your insights and expertise. It was a really great discussion to watch. We'll share a link to the recording of the session with everyone who registered for the event. If you'd like to find out more, you can join Despina, Emma, and Giorgos for our Contemporary Art Summer School taking place this July, this summer. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your days. Bye-bye.
Oh, bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.